For centuries, geometric patterns have been made in a particular way in Islamic art and architecture. It's only now when we see patterns that are made in the 21st century or in 20th century that we can see the difference between the way things have been done for hundreds of years and the way things are done now. I'd like to have a look at a wooden object in the Piyale Pasha Mosque in Istanbul. The mosque was built by the famous architect Mimar Sinan, but the wooden box that we're looking at is much more recent, probably 20th century or maybe 21st century. If we look closely at this pattern on the wooden box, we can see that it has a six-fold geometrical composition. Here we can see 6 pointed stars, 5 of them, and we can see that it fits into a rectangular frame. Now, what I want to look at specifically here is how this composition fits into this rectangular frame, and specifically what happens in the corners, because quite often we find that when compositions are made that it's in the corners where things get most complicated. So we can break this pattern down into hexagonal mini patterns, if you will. So I've done that here, and you can see that you have one hexagonal mini pattern and you tessellate that, you repeat that many times, and then from that you can make this composition. And the red rectangle in the image shows where the composition on the wooden object is. Now you can see that sometimes the little hexagons that surround the 6-pointed star in the way that I've made a mini pattern, you don't see those anymore, and the reason for this is that these lines have been extended to change the shapes and to make different kinds of shapes in this composition, and that's fine, of course. One of the rules that you will always find in Islamic geometric design, certainly designs made before the 20th century, is that lines interlace in a particular way. Lines always suggest that they're going somewhere, they don't just stop somewhere. You don't get lines creating a T intersection. Those are all no-nos in Islamic geometric design typically. There are one or two exceptions, and when there are exceptions they're intentional. You can see that the craftsmen try to do something different. But what you do see quite often in designs that are more recent, like this composition on this wooden object in Piyale Pasha Mosque, is that lines don't go anywhere, that when they get to the corner that craftsmen struggle to figure out what to do, and this is a very good example of that happening. So when we look in the top left hand corner, for example, we can see that there are plenty of lines that create T intersections. They don't go anywhere, and if you imagine that this composition could be infinitely large, and we saw that because we were able to tessellate little hexagonal patterns infinitely if we wanted to, you can see how a composition should be treated in the corner if you look at an identical part of that composition elsewhere. So if you look to the top left hand side of the central star, then you know that what is happening there should also happen to the top left hand side of the star that's in the top left hand corner, if you see what I mean. Except that bits need to be cut off because it needs to fit into a rectangular frame. And that's not been done here, and that's because, as I said, the craftsmen struggled to fill up that space properly and ended up with a solution that's not in keeping with what would have been done traditionally. So I've made an example of how it should have been done, and you can see, hopefully by the lines that I've highlighted in blue, that it only needs a few tiny changes. There's not a lot of extra lines that are needed or different lines that are needed. Some lines need to be extended, other lines should be taken away that were there. But just by a few little modifications in the 4 corners of this rectangular composition, it's fixed, essentially. And it's fixed by using the same construction lines that are available. There's nothing different there. The construction lines are the lines that create the foundation for this pattern. The lines that you trace, and you just decide which parts of these lines you need to trace to make this pattern. So with a tiny tweak, with a tiny correction in the 4 corners, you would have made a composition that probably would have had the approval of the craftsmen who worked on this mosque in the time of Sinan. If you'd like to see more of these videos, please support us on the School of Islamic Geometric Design website.